This episode is proudly brought to you by Optimum Financial Services Group. Optimum has the expertise to guide you through investment, tax, retirement, and estate planning, with a tailored solution to your individual needs. Our objective is to provide you with an optimum solution to protect your wealth. Optimum has expertise in medical aid, legal services, asset finance, and short-term insurance, as well as specialized services in commercial, marine, aviation, and personal liability. Don't choose the average, choose Optimum. Optimum Financial Services Group is an authorized financial services provider. Good afternoon to you. I know it's a very late night in Australia right now, but thank you for signing in and joining us again today. I've got a very interesting and wonderful guest joining. It's a little unusual, and I'm quite excited to get stuck in the conversation. Dr. Bronwyn King is, well, she's a doctor. She worked in the cancer wards, but before that, she was also a very good swimmer. And not only that, she was the team doctor of Australia Swimming. So high performance teams runs through her blood. She has a TED Talk with millions of views. She's all over the world, and for the last decade, she has been running tobacco-free portfolios, and we're going to get right into it, changing the industry against a very big player, the tobacco industry itself. So please, live show, bring your questions, get stuck into this conversation too. My name's Alex McPhail. This is High Performance Teams. Bronwyn, good afternoon, good night, good evening. How are you doing? Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Alex. It's great to be here, and hello to all your viewers. I'm in Melbourne, Australia. We're in lockdown 2.0, so we're all a little bit miserable here, but we keep smiling.
Okay, lockdown 2.0, let's just qualify. Does that mean you had a lockdown and went away and it came back?
That's correct. Well, the truth is we had our first lockdown and we really didn't have much of a first wave at all. We were very lucky and pretty much escaped unscathed. Then I think complacency set in, and now we are having, well, they're calling it the second wave, but really it's our first. But it's a bit depressing because we're back to homeschooling. We can only leave the house for 1 hour a day. There's even a night curfew in Melbourne, and I have to say that's the first time in my life I've ever experienced anything like that. So, but it's lucky that I've got, the ability to join people from all around the world in other ways rather than poiking myself on a plane across the world to see people.
Sure. Well, okay, so 2.0 is basically the second start of the same thing. We have got 5 different levels in this country. We had this lockdown. It was very hard for 3 weeks, and it extended another 3 weeks. That was lockdown, and then they named it, no, this is lockdown level 5, and then it's level 4, and then we went to level 3, and then we went back to level 3.1, and now, so it's a bit confusing in this country.
I agree, and I think that, but this is the thing, isn't it? We're in this extraordinary situation, and governments are making decisions on the fly, and I don't think I even knew that there were stages of lockdown until a few months ago, and now it seems like they're becoming progressively more intense, and this idea of, okay, we're going to lock down for 3 weeks, but then it turns into 9, which turns into 12. But this is the crazy world. It's uncertain. We're making things up as we go and hoping for the best.
Yeah, as I was working on a team of people recently, and they were saying, well, it's like we're building the airplane as we're flying it. So it's a bit kind of what's happening. But interesting for you to note, I'm not sure how much you've kept track on it, but I suspect quite a beady eye. We have an alcohol and tobacco ban at this stage, and it's been in force since the beginning of lockdown, just about. Tobacco was released alcohol was allowed again for about 3 weeks, but cigarettes and all tobacco has been banned since late March. What is the situation with tobacco? Have you kept an eye on it around the world in these lockdowns?
Yeah, South Africa has been a very interesting case study, in fact. And whilst initially people thought it was great, and people thought that we might be able to accelerate tobacco control policy more than ever before, my understanding is that a very recent report showed, in fact, there'd been some unintended consequences in South Africa with a massive increase in illegal, illicit tobacco trade. So that, in fact, has kind of backfired on the intent. But other countries, so India, Botswana and Israel have also had bans on tobacco during various periods of lockdown, and many, many countries have seen a massive number of smokers quit smoking, or at least try to quit or connect with quitting services. So, for example, in the UK, 1 million people have quit smoking since the start of the pandemic. 1 million in one country.
Wow.
And I think, but it makes sense, doesn't it? People are really thinking about their health more than ever before, especially the lungs, because we know that coronavirus has a particular, negative impact on the lungs, and we know that tobacco is a disaster for the lungs. So there might be some silver linings in this, because hopefully people will realise how important it is that they maintain their health, and hopefully more broadly than that, communities will realise that there cannot be wealth without health. It's a fundamental foundation of that.
Sure. Now, okay, we've dived right into it, but it's current affairs right now, but we've had various conversations over the years in various cities. But if we can just backtrack a little bit, maybe just for the benefit of people who don't know you as well, maybe just give us a sense of your sort of formative years. And I know you were a big swimmer, and then you got involved as a doctor in the Team Australia swimming as well. And then your sort of a process of A, healthy living, and B, trying to do the best for, looking after other people's health, and then how then this transitioned into taking on the tobacco industry around the world. No small feat.
Now you said this went for 40 minutes, and for me to answer that question, I'm going to need all night. So I'm going to break that up into little bits for you.
Okay.
But I guess the most important thing to say is that absolutely, in your intro, you talked about swimming and being the team doctor for the Australian swimming team as being really formative for me, and really imprinted this concept of high performance and what it takes to succeed at that super elite level. And just a couple of things that really shaped my thinking around that were, number one, when I started working as the team doctor from the Australian swimming team, I was had not long ago retired from swimming myself, and I knew the times that especially the girls were doing. I knew what they were because I'd been a swimmer myself. And I'd always previously thought that a world record was the fastest a human being could go. I just sort of thought that was the limit. And then working with the Australian swimming team, in front of my own eyes, I watched people break world records. And even before the races, I thought, oh, look, no one can go that fast. It's just not possible. But then I witnessed it myself. And it didn't just happen once. It happened twice, 3, 4, 5 times. And I watched this just happen. And it completely changed the way I think of the word impossible. Okay. And while I think it is fine if you want to say, okay, it's impossible to do that today, I will accept that. I think you need to have a time clause if you're going to put the word impossible in a sentence. But if you just say, look, that's impossible, I have seen too many times in my life that that is not the case. And I've really carried that sense of really being dismissive of the word impossible throughout not just my medical career, but now my work with the finance sector and trying to encourage this massive shift towards sustainable finance.
Okay, so
I think yes.
that's exactly the kind of highlight thread that I wanted to hear. And actually, if I could summarize that into all my guests, that would be a great, like a nice 3-4 minute summary of what your formative years brought you. And so that's perfect. So if observing that it's late night there where you are, take that thread and fast forward us, please, to the conversation which you referred to, because that is a central theme then, and how it kicks off your new journey and where you pivoted.
That's it. So, I think it's important to say I started medicine. I was the brand new shiny doctor planning to save the world. And my very first job out of medicine, I worked on the lung cancer ward at this huge cancer centre in Australia. And despite my very best efforts, nearly every single one of my patients died. And on that ward, nearly all of those patients were smokers or ex-smokers, and nearly all of them had started smoking when they were children. And we often forget that. And so it was devastating to be that person ringing people in the middle of the night, encouraging them to rush into the hospital to say goodbye to their loved ones in their 40s or 50s. And it was just a devastating way to realise that tobacco had a terrible impact on the world. And I know everyone knows that, but seeing it close up firsthand is really quite something. 10 years later, I'm buying a house with my husband. We sit down with the accountant. The accountant says, sort out your money, you two. You need to know how much is in your pension plan. And in Australia, we have a compulsory pension system. And I have to admit, your listeners, do not tune out now. I know that's probably the most boring thing to talk about in the world. I also think it's a really boring topic. And so I had paid no attention at all to my pension. But I'm very obedient. The accountant said, sort it out. It's like, all right, I will. So I meet with the representative for the pension plan for all the healthcare workers at this massive cancer hospital where I was working as a specialist. And we're there in the cafeteria. he brings along all of this paperwork. He shows me how much money I have. We have a nice little chat, and we have a latte. You know, it's all going nicely. I shake his hand, finish the conversation, and I walk away. And completely as an afterthought, I rush back and I said to him, "Oh, look, by the way, was I meant to tell you what to do with that money?" And he said, no, it's all taken care of. You're in the default option. And I said, "Oh, you know, option, does that mean there are other options for how I can invest that money?" And he looked at me, and it was 2010. Now, he looked at me and he rolled his eyes at me and he said, "Oh, look, you know,
you had the coffee."
Yeah, exactly. I'll be done. But he looked at me and rolled his eyes and said, "Oh, look, you know, there is this one greeny option for people who have a problem with investing in mining, alcohol or tobacco." And then there was silence, and I said, "Did you just say tobacco?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "So are you telling me I'm currently investing in tobacco?" And he said, "Oh, yes, everybody is." And that was this incredible moment that ended up changing my whole life, because I just thought, gosh, you know, I just can't walk past that. I can't go to work every day trying so hard to help people who are suffering as a result of tobacco. So 1/3 of all cancers in the world are caused by tobacco, 1/3. And I knew that. I can't be trying to fix that on one hand, and yet on the other hand, my own money is investing in the companies that make the products that are killing my own patients.
Yeah.
And so that started the next segment of my life.
Well, just as my own personal version of that and how we got connected all those years ago, I represent our pension fund in the airline, and I just had this feeling one day with all this review going on, and I just started noticing that BAT, British American Tobacco, was always up at the top stock, and we had lots of money, and they were reporting their investments doing well, and I just like live in the meeting, sharing my thoughts without thinking them through properly. Why are we putting money in tobacco when this is a pension fund aimed at living longer and sustaining oneself? And this seems contradiction. And they didn't actually have any answers for us, and still no real proper answers yet. However, that's how then I went home and did some research, and we got connected, and I'm glad we did. And okay, so now you obviously had some sleepless nights too, and did a bit of research. And so what's the next part of the journey on here after that latte?
Well, the next part is that I really learned everything I could about pensions, and I realise that might sound a bit tragic because it's not like the world's most interesting topic, but I learned everything I could about that world. So I really jumped into the world of finance. I learned how to speak the language of finance. I learned about the regulatory system. I learned how pensions were constructed. I learned a bit about the big players in Australia, and I also learned a lot about sustainable finance, which at that time, 10 years ago, was a very really an immature industry, very, very early days of sustainable finance. And then I started to have conversations with the CEO and the investment team at my own pension fund. And those conversations were really tough at the start. I was, you know, sort of laughed out of the room. I was mocked. People were kind of sometimes polite in front of me, but secretly thinking, you know, oh, that little doctor needs to go away. She's got no idea what she's talking about. So I did, you know, I asked for feedback. I found some mentors. I got better and better. And I was sort of I just wouldn't let it go. I just couldn't let it go, because in the end, it was my money. And, you know, if you're investing in a company, you want that company to grow and succeed and thrive and find new customers. And for me, there was just nothing I wanted less. So I eventually had a big breakthrough. It was 2.5 years later, after I'd presented to the board and many executives at my big pension fund, which is the second biggest pension plan in Australia. And they decided to go tobacco free. They got rid of all their tobacco across all of their options that you can invest in. And they did that in the middle of 2012. And they felt great. They had a great reception from their members, from the public, from the community, and ultimately, of course, from our hospital, because we were a massive part of their membership.
Sure.
And then once that happened, I thought, you know what? If they can do it, why can't the rest of them do it?
The record's being broken now.
That's it. The record's been broken. It is possible. That's exactly it. I knew it was possible. And also I knew the problem was so much bigger than I realised at the start, because it wasn't just Australia and it wasn't just pension plans. It was banks, insurance agencies, asset managers, and it was the whole global finance sector. So I realised there was a really big opportunity for change. And I also realised that I was in this really unique niche I sat between health and finance, and I realized there was a big conversation that was missing that needed to be had, and I was teaching myself how to have it.
Okay. So at this point now, is it just you having these conversations and you trying to just upskill yourself, or had you already started assembling your team, whether physically or in your mind?
Yeah, well, so early on, what I realized was that I had gaps. So, of course, yeah, great. I knew a lot about medicine, and then I could learn a lot about tobacco, and then I did learn a lot about finance. But what I did very early on was find a team member who really complemented my skill set, because I realized that I just didn't know enough. And it's fine not to know enough, but in a team, you need to find people who bring all the skills that you need.
Sure.
And so very early on, I found someone with a background in ethical finance, and she's also a lawyer by background. And she had set up an initiative from scratch in Australia. She was based in Sydney. I found her on the internet just by Googling amazing people that I needed to become friends with. And then when we were both randomly presenting at a conference together, and when she finished her speech, I just bowled up to her and pretty much told her we needed to become best friends and I wanted her to join my team. And a very short time later, that's exactly what happened. And she's still with me today. So I just got off a telephone call or a video call with her.
Oh, great.
So, many, many years later, we've gone on this journey together. And I often say, without her, this journey would not have been possible, because, it was just so important for me to bring expertise from different places onto the same team.
And from the get-go, I mean, it's great having the energy and the ideas and everything, but sometimes you just need that, the wingman in my speak, just to get through that first hurdle as well. Sometimes those
Maybe
first hurdles.
Call her that. I might call her that from now on. I love that.
The wingman. Well, we can get to flying talk just now. I know you're a very keen traveler. You travel a lot with this. Well, not right now, but okay. So now you start assembling your team, and you've got your wingman. And what's her name, by the way?
Claire's
okay.
my wingman, Claire Payne.
Claire Payne, the wingman, right? The wingwoman. So you guys embark on this journey. And I mean, you're welcome to fast forward, and we can chew on the nice meaty bits too. But so then you get a bit of momentum, and it was about 3 years ago you were in Johannesburg, 2 to 3 years ago, and you just were about to sign a nice big one. I think, was it Qantas? Qantas is now with you, or something around that time.
Qantas Super. So in Australia, we call our pension funds super funds. Don't ask why, that's just what we call them. But so the Qantas pension fund had signed up by then, yes. And in fact, if you want to go to one of those pictures that you showed me, the $1.3 trillion one, this is when we really had turned the corner in Australia, because so this picture, I've spent half of my life creating that picture, and it is a picture of the CEOs and the chairs of more than 45 Australian pension plans that have gone completely tobacco-free. And together they control a total of $1.3 trillion of Australians' money, and that's now all tobacco-free. And you can see me at one end. I'm at one end of that next to the lady in red, and Claire is at the other end, also the same position as me, but at the other end there.
Oh,
now, the other very important member of my team in this picture, there's two other very important members. One is the lady in red with the red jacket. Mm-hmm. Now, it's very important to get a princess on your team, whatever you're doing. If you can, a Middle Eastern princess is a highly recommended team member. So we managed to secure a global ambassador in Her Royal Highness Princess Dina Mired of Jordan. And for us, that took us to a different place, because she opened doors that we absolutely couldn't open, and she would appear with us at events, and it meant that the whole gravitas of what we were trying to do was really uplifted. And then our first step globally outside of Australia, we went to Europe, and the lady on the other end in sort of the bluish hued top, right on the other end, is Dr. Rachel Melsom, and that was when we first tried to expand our work into Europe. And this here, you can see there, so Claire's on one end, I'm on the middle, Rachel with the orange scarf on the other end. That was one of our greatest achievements, and that was, we were thrilled to work with the biggest bank in Europe, BNP Paribas, and the gentleman, I was about to say with a blue tie, that's not going to help, the gentleman who is next to the lady with the orange scarf is the CEO of BNP Paribas, the biggest bank in Europe. And we worked with them, and they decided to stop lending, investing and insuring tobacco companies. That was a $3 billion decision, and their CEO joined our advisory council and has been one of our greatest supporters ever since. So it's been absolutely sensational.
So
we have people of that ilk.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we've maybe because you've told the story many times over, but I think we fast forwarded through a few big events there. So firstly, when you're saying the word trillion and you're talking about money, and it's sort of top class currency and not the Zimbabwe dollars, I mean, that's a big achievement. So The picture was up there. I'll put this picture back just so we can pause on that for a moment. So $1 trillion. So essentially, with your logo there on the left, tobacco-free portfolios, are these all people that have now signed a pledge? You're calling it a pledge, or what had happened at this point?
No. The pledge wasn't invented yet. So these organisations are exclusively Australian. So you can see our beautiful. I'm from Melbourne, but I claim the Sydney Harbour Bridge and the Opera House as my own. So you can see the beautiful scenery of Australia in the background there. And the truth is, we actually photoshopped that a little bit. It wasn't that nice a day, so it wasn't actually that blue in the sky. It was 7 o'clock one morning. But the thing is that all of these, we invited the CEOs and the chairs of all of these big financial organisations to be in this picture. And the amazing thing is that they wanted to be in the picture. And one of our philosophies in our work is we name and fame. We name and fame the organisations that we deal with. So we work very quietly behind the scenes, very professionally with them, and really try to take an approach of, educating them and making them more informed about what's going on. And so this picture is amazing. And, I'm just so happy that all of these people feel so proud about being part of this movement. In fact, the CEO of Qantas Superannuation is there.
Okay, cool.
And yeah, he's right there in the front row. And so the 1.3 trillion is the total amount of money of all of those pension plans put together. So Australia has the 4th biggest pension sector in the world, which is amazing. Yeah. And so it was a great case study for us to take overseas, because people could see that actually it was possible to go tobacco-free, and you could still make loads of money and have a very comfortable return and very good, healthy returns, but without having to have anything to do with the tobacco industry.
Okay, so were that 1.3 trillion, was that all then because of the work you and your team are doing to say get out of tobacco? So, I mean, I'm just trying to figure out how it is allocated, or do they then say we support tobacco-free portfolios and therefore this money is all in one group? I don't mean one bank account, but one group of people.
Basically, we added up the total amount of money. So every year in Australia, every pension plan is lined up, and the amount of money that they have under control is lined up. And we added up the 45 that were tobacco-free. We took their amounts of money that they're running, and now knowing that all of that money was now tobacco-free. And it's a way a lot of finance initiatives around the world do that with money, to just show how much money is committed to a certain thing.
Sure.
And so we took that idea, and then we turned it into our flagship global initiative, which is called the Pledge.
Okay, so before we get to the Pledge, okay, so now we're going to go to this other nice photo, which we kind of talked through quickly. So you've taken this momentum from Australia and you've moved off to Europe, and signing with BNP Paribas, the CEO standing next to you there. That's a major. So essentially, you have to convince one of the bosses of one of the biggest banks in the world to say, we no longer support.
Bank in the world.
We no longer support a whole industry, which is a massive industry. That's a big. How do you have that conversation?
Oh, it's a great question. It's many, many conversations over a long period of time, and as I said, very diplomatic, informative conversations. And it's been so interesting because and my team, we've been so lucky to engage at the very highest levels. With CEOs and chairs. And you can't be the CEO of a massive financial organisation without being a very impressive person. They're super intelligent, sophisticated, very, they've all got an X factor of some kind. That's how they got the job in the first place. And so meeting people like that is really, a great privilege. And I have learnt so much from all of these amazing leaders around the world. And I hope to, really pick up some of their tips and tricks. And I like to copy the way that they act. But the thing that I really liked about working with this gentleman, Jean-Laurent Bonnefay, is he's an amazing listener, and he's one of those people who just really wants to get all the knowledge out of the people he's meeting with. So, and I have really found that in really great leaders, they listen and they drink in the knowledge that you give them. And so that's exactly what he did with me the first time I met him. I thought it was going to be a 20-minute meeting. It turned into over an hour, and he just kept asking me questions and questions and questions and testing me and saying, but what about this? What about this? What about this argument? What about that? And I just gave him all of the information. He went away, distilled it, and invited me back. And then he invited me back, and he invited me back. And then finally, he actually ended up sending me a text message to say, you're going to enjoy the next email you get. And then I wrote back saying, well, come on, put me out of my misery. What's it going to say? And he said, well, we're out, and we'd love you to help us with an event, and we'd love to take a real leadership position on this and encourage others to follow suit. So, if you've got something in mind, we'd love to be part of it.
Oh,
and that picture was at the United Nations in Geneva, and the other gentleman in the picture at the time, he was the UN Human Rights Commissioner. That is His Royal Highness Prince Zayed, and he is was the UN Human Rights Commissioner. And we had a fantastic announcement of BNP going tobacco-free. There were hundreds of complimentary articles. And, in fact, every year since then, BNP Paribas has won the most sustainable bank in the world award. And, of course, it's not just that they're tobacco-free. They've done other things as well. But I like to think that going tobacco-free was one big part of that.
Sure. Okay, so that was your first big win outside of Australia. Did I understand that timeline correctly?
Yeah, no, that's the correct timeline. You've got it there. Yeah,
okay.
There was one other big one in there, which was when AXA went tobacco-free.
Okay.
So AXA is one of the biggest insurance companies in the world. But BNP Paribas was, it was a massive moment, and a very big step forwards for us.
Okay, so the question that I get asked as well is that I pose the question to the investors, and I say, why are we investing in tobacco? And the normal response is, well, the stocks do so well. So I know it's probably not the same today, and I know the last 18 months or so there's been a dip, but COVID might have made it better or worse. What is the answer to that? So, I mean, that must be your standard first response is, well, how do we get around investing without the top shares?
Well, actually, so since 2017, that question's not a question anymore, because the tobacco industry financially has been extremely volatile and shaky and has considerably underperformed the rest of the market. So in 2018, tobacco stocks were the worst performing sector on the whole market. So and 2019, it's continued. So there's no argument on that anymore. And in fact, one of the big funds we worked with, the biggest pension plan in Europe, they got rid of their tobacco stocks with our input, and it was great to work with them at the start of 2017. By the end of 2017, they were €700 million better off.
Oh, wow.
That's
a nice
that
figure.
argument is done. It's done.
Okay.
If you want to make money, you shouldn't have tobacco in your portfolio.
Okay, good. I hope my investors are listening.
Yeah, well, if they're not, I mean, and look, of course, that sounds very simplistic. You need to consider the issue in great detail. There's all of these other little nuances that need to be understood and people need to feel comfortable with. But that argument, once upon a time, was a little challenging, but it's not anymore. And the truth is, even when tobacco stocks were doing well, there are other ways that you can achieve the same returns, just with different sectors.
Yeah. Okay. So now you've got some momentum. You're getting some big corporates, banking and insurance, and those are big ones to get. And it's a bit like the record's tumbling now. You've seen a bit of momentum. You've seen your first one at the hospital. You've seen the nation supporting with $1 trillion. Now you've seen some European banks and investors. What's the next step? What do you do from there? So you just keep going on the momentum. What is there? A new target? What follows?
Well, by that stage, so Claire and I started to get invited to events at the United Nations in New York. And every September, they have this thing called UN Week, United Nations Week. And basically everybody trying to do anything major and address any major global issue like hunger or poverty or the environment, whatever it is, seems to be in New York that week. And we randomly ended up there in 2017 in September, and we got invited to this one event at the UN, and it was on sustainable finance, and we just sort of observed what was going on. And then a few months later, that's when BNP Paribas made their decision, and we were at the UN. We went to the UN in Geneva, and a few more weeks go by, and it was Christmas time, December 2017, and I rang Claire, and I said, look, everybody else is having an event at the UN. Why don't we have one too? And she just said, well, absolutely, let's do it. So I emailed 3 different UN agencies, the heads of 3 different UN agencies, and I thought maybe, there might be a 1% chance that one of them would say, yeah, we'll help you do exactly that, have an event at the UN. 48 hours later, all 3 had come back to me, and they'd all said, we'll partner with you, we'll partner with you, we'll partner with you. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And so I then reached out to some of these big corporates, the CEOs, and I said, look, if we had an event at the UN, would you come? And they all said, yes, yes, yes. And I just thought, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. And then we're having our first phone call. It's January of 2018. This is planned for September 2018. So I've only got, 8 or 9 months. And I was getting all excited. And I said, oh, this is great. We'll launch this initiative. We're going to call it the Pledge, the Tobacco-Free Finance Pledge. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be at the UN. And one of the heads of the UN agency said, oh, Bronwyn, you do realise that to have an event at the UN during the UN General Assembly, you do need a prime minister and a president to sign off on that event.
Well, that's easy.
Yeah, and then he said, oh, by the way, one of them really should be from the G7.
Oh.
And it was like, oh my gosh, tell an Australian that, like we're not even in the G7. So to cut a very long story short, about 57 miracles occurred, and I ended up meeting the president of France, who did sign off on our event. I met the Prime Minister.
But now you're fast forwarding through the juicy bits. Okay, anyway.
Okay, all right. I was looking at the time there thinking we haven't got long left. All right.
I'm not limited, you're limited because you have to go to bed at some point. So add a little bit of flavour to this French president meeting.
Okay, a little bit of flavour to that story is that I was totally taken aback by this. Oh my gosh, you need a Prime Minister and a president. It's like, oh my gosh, how on earth is that going to happen? So I reached out to all of these business leaders and said, can someone help me here? Because, they were all CEOs from all over the world and they're very well-connected people. And 2 weeks later, the CEO of BNP Paribas sends me an email and he said, what do you think of this letter? And he attached a letter, and it was a letter that was addressed to the President of France, and it said effectively that many organisations in France had worked with us. They really liked what we were doing, how we were doing it, and it would be wonderful if the president's team would consider meeting with me when I'm next in Paris. And he signed it, and he got 3 other CEOs of major French organisations to sign it. Oh. Anyway, the French president's team accepted that meeting, and I was going to be in France only a month later. And so there I was, and I went off to the Elysée in Paris. I met with one of Macron's advisors, and of course Macron's into sustainability. That's his thing. Okay. And climate, he's into this. And so they said, oh, he's going to love it. Just go back home, sort that out with your Prime Minister, and we'll be in together. And I was like, okay, all right, leave that with me. And on the way home, that's when I went to South Africa. I dropped into South Africa. So the world's biggest anti-tobacco conference was happening, and that's where I met the head of the UN Tobacco Control Treaty. And I said to her, if we have this event at the UN, will you come? And she said, absolutely. And that's where I met the head of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros, who's now become very famous during the pandemic.
Sure.
And I said to Dr. Tedros, what do you think about this? And he listened very carefully to what I was explaining, telling him all about the work. He gave me a great big smile, and he said, that is the missing piece of global tobacco control. Uh-huh. And I was like, oh my gosh, of course I wrote that down, and now that's on our website and on every brochure we've ever made. And I said to him, if we have this event, will you come? And he said yes. And I was like, man, this is fantastic. So then I go home, and all I've got to do is get to my own Prime Minister, and we're sweet. But I couldn't get to him. I could not get to him. I wrote to him. I rang him. I rang his office. I rang other ministers. And the thing was, in Australia, it just turned out that every minister said that they would tell the Prime Minister once another minister had signed off. But there was this never-ending circuit of this one will do it when this one says, but they won't do it till they say, and they say, and they say. And when they're all happy, then they'll go to the Prime Minister. And the problem was that President Macron was coming to Australia that year. And just a few weeks later, I get an email from the Elysée in Paris saying, oh, President Macron's on his way, and he looks forward to bringing this up with the Prime Minister of Australia. We hope that you've already had a conversation with him. It's on our agenda, and that's all happening tomorrow.
Oh, man.
And I was going out of my mind. I thought, oh, my gosh, I'm going to create this international diplomatic disaster because I can't reach my own Prime Minister. But it was a Tuesday morning. It was the 1st of May, 2018, and I woke up knowing the President was in the air on his way to Australia, and that I was about to mess everything up. And I just tried one more time. I thought, you know what, I got nothing to lose. So I rang everybody I knew in Australia's capital, Canberra, where we have our Parliament House. I rang every single person basically, and I said, you have to brief the Prime Minister. Someone has to tell the Prime Minister. It's on the agenda. I've heard, help me. And at 10:30 that morning, someone rings me back and they say, oh, look, the health minister's fine, he's in, and we're about to brief the Prime Minister, and you'll hear from the Prime Minister's office shortly. Then the Prime Minister's office rings me and says, calm down, it's all fine, we're briefing the Prime Minister, it's all good, it's all good. And by the way, you are coming to the Opera House for dinner tonight, aren't you, Dr. King?
Different country, now, different town.
Different city. Now, I live in Melbourne. Anyway, of course, at that exact moment, I was like, my gosh, well, I could be, I would like, yes, I will be at dinner. I will get there. And so I put down the phone, immediately rang my assistant and I said, book me a flight to Sydney now. I cannot have someone ring me with a ticket and then say, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm in the wrong city. I don't care if I have to eat dinner by myself in Sydney, but I've just got to be there in case a ticket comes through.
Sure.
And so just as the taxi pulled up, I got this ping in my email and there was a ticket to dinner at the Opera House with the President of France and the Prime Minister of Australia. And the story goes that they both signed off. And indeed, as September 2018 rolled around, we launched the Tobacco-Free Finance Pledge at the UN in New York.
Well, so that's what it reminds me a little bit of one of those things. If it wasn't for the last 5 minutes, nothing would get done. So the president's airborne and is on his way, and finally things are getting signed off. But an amazing story.
Never give up. Never, ever give up. Don't ever give up. It's always possible till the very, very, very last moment.
Yeah, don't quit. Well, we got some comments coming through. My father-in-law's watching. Jock says, hi, Alex and Dr. King. He's a pipe smoker of 50 years. He stopped during COVID. Not sure about giving up, but Dr. King has my full support. He says, wish there were more people as passionate. Wish there were more people as passionate about doing the right things. Yeah, guys, you're welcome to share your questions. We're going to continue on the conversation in the meantime. Okay, so you mentioned then also New York. Now it's great to get that sign off, and now you have the opportunity to be part of the UN General Assembly. So that's back in New York again, and everything seems to happen in New York.
Oh, it does. I know. Oh, it's killing me. It's the longest I haven't been to New York. So I left New York in January. It's now August. It's the longest I haven't been in New York for 5 years, and I think that what you said is exactly right. A lot happens in New York. New York is just full of, it's full of the world. New York is the world. Everybody's there from everywhere, and people are full of great hope and great optimism and great ideas and great energy. And, many times I have secretly wanted to move to New York, but it's a bit tricky when our kids are at school here. But I love New York, and I always feel just so inspired when I'm there because, so many people who are very influential and can make things happen are in New York. So it's a great place to be if you really want to create change.
Yeah, and the buzz. Okay, so you've got your sign off, and so what happens at this event of the UN General Assembly now? You've got your president and your prime minister, and you've got 3 different lobbying supporting you.
Yep, that's right. And basically everyone turned up. So we had 18 speakers at an event. And yeah, so before that I had to pad out my team and we had to get 18 VIPs in the correct place at the right time. At the UN, things are remarkably strict. So this is a picture of us at the event. This is what they call the family photo. And in this photo, you will see some, I don't know if you can see you can't see me pointing to anything there, can you? But basically, there's some super VIPs there. So we have the Princess, Her Royal Highness, Princess Dina Mead of Jordan. We have the head of the UN Tobacco Control Treaty. We have Dr. Tedros, who you might recognise, sitting down there in the middle. He's the head of the World Health Organization. The Prime Minister of Australia had actually been overthrown by then, and they wouldn't let me put him in the middle. So he's over at the side because they're very regimented with where you sit. Mm-hmm. And there are some all the people standing up are CEOs or chairs of some of the biggest financial organisations in the world, including, so the CEO of BNP Paribas is there, but the Californian Treasurer is there. I invited him to come. I knew he's a very anti-tobacco champion, and I invited him, and he flew over and he spoke at our event. So this is full of a lot of movers and shakers in finance, in health, in diplomacy, in government, and this is our living, breathing initiative. And as of today, there's 141 organisations that have signed up to this initiative, and they're worth a combined total of $10.9 trillion US. $10.9 trillion. which is a lot of money. I always think if you have to count how many zeros need to be in the number, it's an awfully big number.
Well, I did the same thing because I was looking through your webpage in the last few days, and you got that counter there, the 10.9, is it? What are we? Are we billions? Is it trillion? Where are we at? It's such a big number.
It is, and it's funny because when I used to write the word trillion, I used to write it with a capital T. Mm-hmm. And then someone had to point out it doesn't come with a capital. And it's like, well, it should because it's so enormous.
Yeah, I think it should too. Okay, so if you've got to this $10 trillion pool, what's the goal? What's next? Where are you getting to? So I'm going to just flash this up while we talk to just sort of talk people through. Maybe not everyone's familiar with the sustainable goals and how it impacts, or how tobacco impacts, and how you guys sort of weave your way in your story through these 17 sustainable development goals. What is the goal ultimately for tobacco-free portfolios?
Well, the goal for tobacco-free portfolios is to disentangle the global finance sector from tobacco. And even though that's the way finance has always worked in the past, it doesn't need to work like that now. And there's no way we would invent the finance sector the way if we were launching it today, there's no way we would just routinely invest in tobacco, routinely lend tobacco companies money, routinely insure them, given that every single year 8 million people die as a result of tobacco. And the terribly big number is that the world's on track for 1 billion tobacco-related deaths this century. 1 billion. Yeah. There's only 7.5 billion of us. This doesn't make any sense at all. Why would we support that industry? And so the Sustainable Development Goals were sort of set into force by all of the countries of the United Nations. So really these are the world's goals that we've agreed on as a global society to try to work towards by 2030 to achieve a fair, just and sustainable world and a sustainable community. And when you look at that, most people just jump to number 3 and say, oh, yes, tobacco fits into the good health and well-being goal, which indeed is true. But actually, there's 14 of these goals which won't be achieved unless there's huge change on tobacco. And there's many that can be underpinned there. So just 2 I'll give you an example of. So zero hunger, number 2. Now, at the moment, more money is spent in Indonesia on tobacco than on rice. So we are not going to fix
That's consumer. That's a consumer level.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. We are not going to fix hunger if we don't fix tobacco. And then another interesting one, which I was not aware of until just 18 months ago, number 14, life below water. Everybody's very concerned about ocean plastic, and rightly so. The number 1 ocean plastic is cigarette filters from cigarette butts. Number 1. And people think, I used to think it was bags or bottles or plastic straws. It's not. It's cigarettes. So we're not going to have a flourishing life below water. We're not going to have clean oceans if we don't deal with the issue of tobacco. And so you can go through all of these, and there's very, slightly depressing statistics that underlie that. But it really just shows how when there is this very big, complex global issue, it's not just about having the health sector fix the problem or governments fix the problem. Everyone has to be lined up and stand shoulder to shoulder. And that's why, we really try to work with the finance sector, tell them about this, let them know, and really make them understand that we can't fix a problem without them.
So now, so just to paint a picture there with the Sustainable Development Goals, it underpins your kind of ethos and where you're going with tobacco-free portfolios. But if you go back to the goal and achievement to disentangle it completely, has it got its own momentum now? Are you still finding that you have to go to each new big finance place? And I had this last week. We go live. If anyone's watching live, I know there's a bit of a delay. Just type a message that you're still there. You're back again. Okay, so just
am I back?
You're back. You're back again. Sorry. Okay, so what I was saying really is that having had a bit of momentum, you're a decade down. You've got some big people behind you. You've got $1 trillion allocation with their investment. When you speak to new people, new finance houses, new companies, are you starting this conversation from the beginning each time still, or can you start at page 2 or chapter 3, or where do you start now with new people?
It's a great question, and it very much depends on which country I'm in. So, in Australia, in New Zealand, in Scandinavia, in the Netherlands, France, and Canada, we're up to, say, chapter 10, 11, 12.
Great.
The UK is, the UK just had their first 2 big announcements. So 2 very big pension plans, including the biggest pension plan, went tobacco-free in May. So, we've just seen some breakthrough there. The USA, there's little patches of brilliance, but that overwhelming momentum is right at the very start in the USA. So we've just opened, we've got an office there now, and we're going to spend a lot of time working there. So that's one of the secret reasons why I would like to go to New York, but and live in New York. But it's, we are going to have to do a lot of work in the States, but the whole sustainability revolution has been accelerated during the pandemic and during COVID. And I think that there's no one left who doesn't understand how important sustainability is. Mm-hmm. And so I think that we've been able to accelerate partly because of that massive global shift in sentiment around sustainability.
Okay, and so you mentioned COVID now. So have you been engaged more now during COVID, or are you able to watch your work just flourish during COVID? Where does it fit in? Or they want to know more detail of what's happening now?
Yeah, it's been interesting because previously I would fly around the world to meet people in person and have lots of personal meetings in people's offices on their clock, on their, on their time schedule, on their time zone. But now I have a Zoom or a Skype or a Teams call, and they're suddenly in my office in my house, and I'm in their office, or I'm in their home. Suddenly I'm in their lounge room if they're in lockdown. But so it's been a very interesting transition, because before 6 months ago, no CEO would ever have taken a meeting like this. It just would never have happened. Sure. So for me, the leaders have actually been more accessible for me than previously. Okay. And I've been able to reach them a lot more quickly than having to schedule something that might be 3 or 6 months in advance and require 48 hours on a plane, 24 hours to get there, 2 weeks there, and 24 hours to get home. Obviously, living in Australia is a geographical disadvantage when you're trying to do global work.
Yeah, and you can hit your stopwatch out and time it till when the landing comes.
I love doing that. Oh my goodness, I absolutely love doing that. Yeah, I had lots of great. I love flying. I had lots of great fun flying, and I have to say it's so disappointing to be a Qantas Platinum 1 member the year that you can't fly. I only just got my,
no.
It's like, yeah, I know. So I had all of these great things, and Qantas did look after me very well. I was very lucky to have, just sort of a great experience flying, and I spent a massive amount of time on planes, and I feel very bad for all of the super staff who, have had a terrible time of late, because they certainly looked after me and my team very, very well.
Well, the industry has, the aviation, tourism, all industries have been shaken up in some respects. But okay, so along the way, I just also wanted to talk about one more thing, is that you have to, well, you don't have to, but you get invited and you become very much a public speaker, and you get a TED Talk. Now, to just all of a sudden get 3 million views on a TED event is also no mean achievement. So talk me through how that came about, and your sort of preparation, excitement for it, and how that kicked off a new journey in public speaking, etc.
Yeah, so I knew for many years that an opportunity like a TED Talk would be an amazing gift to have to try to advance the cause that I was working for. And so really early on, many people said, you should do a TED Talk, you should do a TED Talk. And I didn't really look into it too much until we started to take some global steps. And I thought, you know what, I should just have a crack at this. And so I applied, and to do it in Sydney, because that was the biggest one in Australia. The main reason I applied to Sydney, even though I'm from Melbourne, is because they used to host it at the Opera House. And I thought, damn it, if I'm going to do a talk, I'm going to do it at the Opera House. Like, what a great thing. Anyway, of course, the year I did it, they changed that, and they did it in a completely different venue, which totally broke my heart. But anyway, but I put this in, and I found out, the day I found out I'd been selected, I was actually sitting in an airline lounge, got this phone call, and they said, you've been selected to do a TED Talk. And I put down the phone, and the very next thing I did was ring a sports psychologist.
Okay.
So in my swimming days, I used to get very nervous before I swam. Mm-hmm. And I knew that TED Talk for me was going to be something that would really make me nervous, because in Sydney there's 4,500 people who come to see it, 12 cameras, there's no notes, there's no guidance, there's no auto cue, and it's one shot. And I knew it was going to mean the absolute world to me. And I thought, well, I'm going to prepare for this like it's the Olympic Games. So it was the swimmer in me coming back into force. And so I rang this sports psychologist, and it was fascinating because she said to me, I don't know if you really need me. You probably need my sister, who is a performance coach. And the truth is I ended up working with them both. So I worked with them both because I wanted to do everything I possibly could to deliver the absolute best performance I could on the day. And every moment of that 3 months between the phone call and getting on stage, I was living and breathing the TED Talk. It really was my Olympics. I just spent so much time on it. I tried absolutely every technique to make it better. I got feedback. In terms of remembering it, because it's a scripted talk, in terms of remembering it, I learned all of these little techniques about how, like when I was making 3 points, I'd make 1, 2, and 3, and that would help me remember. I'd step back to the left, and that meant I was going to tell this story. Then I'd move over here, and that meant that sentence came next. And it was almost like a choreographed piece of work. But I did everything I could to prepare, and it was funny. Someone was filming me right beforehand, just before I went on stage, and without realising, right beforehand, I jumped up and down like I used to do before I swam a race, and I shook my hands, and I thought, isn't it funny that all those years later I've used exactly the same high-performance skills to get myself in good shape to deliver the best possible performance on the day. And, I gave it my best shot. And actually, a year later, only 3,000 people had watched 1 year later. And I thought, you know what, never mind. It's only 3,000 people. I did my best. I have to be happy with that. And the thing was, I brought myself a bit of peace, and I thought, you know what, at least the right people are seeing this, because I got a message from this big pension plan in Europe that went tobacco free, and they said, thanks for the TED Talk. And I thought, oh, well, that's good enough. But then a year afterwards, I got this email from TED headquarters in the USA, and they said, we've picked your talk to put on the big TED platform. And they did that, and within a few days it was several 100,000. Within a few weeks it was over 1 million, and now it's over 3 million. And so it's just been such an amazing gift to have that to be able to share with the world. And if anyone wants to watch or Google or just get a taste for the work that we do, it's just a great thing to be able to send to people.
Yeah, it is nice. And it's become your showreel, and even though obviously you try to get it as busy and as viral as possible, but even though there was only 3,000 a year later, as you say, the right 3,000, but you prepared for it like it was your Olympics, and you've given it your best. And the high performance teams in you, the thorough preparation, the execution with the precision, and then review. What did you do right after? Just curious. I mean, besides having a glass of champagne or something, did you think about how it went? Did you analyze it? Like, did you dissect how your delivery was? Did you give it some thought? Did you think about how you'd improve it for next time right away, or was it a fire and forget and okay, done, moving on?
So, I mean, that day I actually ended up staying in the green room and just tried to enjoy the day. I was the first speaker of the day. There were like 20 speakers after me, and I just was so happy that I got through it, that I just wanted to enjoy the day. But in terms of the review of the talk, I didn't watch it for maybe 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Because I couldn't bring myself to. I just needed to calm down a bit. And when I watched it at work alone in a room. I closed the door. I said, don't interrupt me. I've got to watch this. And I watched it like this. And I was sort of like watching like that. And after the first little bit, it was like, oh, no, she's all right. Oh, no, she remembered that bit. No, she's okay. She's all right. Oh, no, come on. She's doing a good job. It was like watching someone else doing it.
Okay.
And I think like any person who's trying to achieve a great thing, you're very hard on yourself. And I think as I've got a little bit older, going from the swimmer who was hard on herself to the schoolgirl who was hard on herself, wanting to get into medicine, to, I've always wanted to try to achieve great things. But I did, when I watched that talk, I also tried to learn that, there were a couple of tiny mistakes that, of course, really annoy me. Like I literally forgot 2 words. No one else would know, but I know that I forgot them. But I watched the whole thing thinking, you know what, she did a good job.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, and it was absolutely the best I could have done. It was truly the best. And And I'm really glad I put so much time and effort into execution.
No, that's great. Well, it's a nice story. This public speaking is something we've spoken about before, and it's nice to hear the whole culmination of it, the thorough preparation, and it's a performance, like you say, it's the Olympics. We've got.
Absolutely.
I don't want to keep you all night, but we've got some questions coming through, and Catherine, my sister-in-law, is saying, "What are your thoughts on the current COVID-related tobacco ban in South Africa?" So we touched it on the beginning, and you mentioned it's now opened up the illicit trade. But what are your thoughts on the whole idea of banning it and the result?
Well, I think that, there's a few things to say there. One is it's clearly not an essential service. So, this idea of classifying tobacco as essential doesn't make any sense. And it's a bit like in the finance sector, tobacco is classified as a consumer staple, something you can't live without, which is, of course, completely the opposite. Yeah. It's the one thing that you can't live with.
Yeah.
So, I think that, we do need to think about how it doesn't really make sense to be classified as a staple. But I think we also need to really reach out to smokers and encourage them to quit. So I think banning something, while on the surface you might think, oh, that's a great way of getting people to stop. Actually, very few people smoke and feel fantastic about it. They smoke because they started smoking when they were kids or teenagers, and it is a highly addictive product. And we know the tobacco industry has deliberately made it more addictive in the past 20 years. So you don't have to smoke very much and your whole body physiology has changed and you feel addicted. And we need to understand that. So in Australia, the statistics are that 90% of our current smokers regret that they started smoking, and more than half try to quit every year. So during this lockdown or these very difficult times, we actually really need to support smokers and help them with quit services and with psychological counselling and behavioural therapy, maybe some patches, and also there's medications that are very helpful that can calm down the addictive parts of the brain.
Okay.
So we do need to be we need to be compassionate and kind to smokers.
All right. Well, that's, yeah. So, one of the big things that they're trying to prevent in South Africa certainly is this communal smoking, where, it's quite a poor community generally in South Africa where they will share cigarettes, and this passing around, 2 or 3 people sharing the one cigarette. There's a famous song that's been made from the health minister's speech. But anyway, this, passing the saliva on the cigarette butt because you're sharing it is not good for COVID. So that was really one of the big things why they said stop.
I think the other thing is we don't know about, there's significant evidence that COVID can be spread via aerosols. And so we know that the smoke from cigarettes, or, when you exhale, where is that vapor going? This is a respiratory disease. We're very worried about respiratory spread. So we do need to make sure that, at the very least, if people are smoking because they're addicted to the product, that they don't do it around anybody else, because we need to be mindful of COVID spread.
Okay. Well, it's been great chatting with you. I just wanted to sort of get the last parting thoughts on 2 things, really. One is, so your goal is to try and disentangle the finance and tobacco industries, which is a great goal. But like playing forward in the next 6 months or 2 years, what is the sort of roadmap that you're going to measure that by to say, we're doing it? What's happening next for tobacco-free portfolios?
Well, I guess we divide it into banks, insurance agencies, pension plans, asset managers, the different segments of the finance sector. And we really want to make sure that more and more of the large players in each of those segments has a conversation about tobacco-free and considers signing up to our pledge. So we've got that $10 trillion or $10.9 trillion signed up to the pledge. We want it $20 trillion, and we want it as soon as possible, because it really is just about having those conversations. And I've never met a finance leader of any organisation that feels really great about having these financial links and commercial relationships with the tobacco industry. None of them feel good about it. And it's because, in the end, none of them want their own families or their own kids or their own community to suffer from the devastation of smoking. So that's our big goal. How are we going to do it? We're going to do it remotely if we have to. And we're very well placed, because I think that doing so much travel and planting so many seeds and having so many early conversations with people has put us in great shape to follow those up virtually. So,
and are the people,
we will be embracing the virtual world.
That's great. But are there also people reaching out directly to you, or does it all come from you still knocking on their doors? Or has there been that momentum yet?
Yeah, there's a bit of both. So, every week we get some emails from different people who've come across our work through whatever means it is. It can be through the Sustainable Development Goals. It could be through the UN. It could be because a financial organisation that they work with has signed our pledge and got great, a really great boost because of that. So, yeah, we do have lots of people coming to us, and then we've got lots of ongoing conversations with organisations in more than 20 different countries, so including South Africa. We don't have a South African signatory yet to our pledge. I've only been there once, as I said, for a couple of days, but we would love to increase the discussions in South Africa. There's some very, very big financial organisations there, including your big national pension fund. In fact, after I met you, Alex, I sat next to a very senior government figure on the plane, either to or from seeing you, and I did try to encourage her. I felt a bit sorry for her sitting next to me. I think she was just after a bit of a relaxing time, but she got a full account of the issue. So I do hope to see some progress in South Africa very soon.
Well, when you strike while the iron's hot, I mean, our Minister of Health is saying that tobacco is bad, so maybe you should set up a Zoom meeting with her. I'll see what we can organise for you.
Fantastic. That's how it all happens.
Yeah, you see, you heard it here first. Last question for you, Bronwyn, before I let you get to bed. You have been part of a high-performance team, you've been a doctor in a high-performance team, and you've created your own high-performance team and tobacco-free portfolios. So tell me, what is your top tips in creating a high-performance team?
I think the really key thing for me has been to find people who are really exceptional to be on the team with me. So I think it's funny especially when people are younger, I give lots of talks to young emerging leaders, and I think that young people are sometimes afraid of people who are smarter than them or have more expertise. But I've always thought, don't be afraid of those people. Do everything you can to make them your best friend. Get them on your team. You need the smartest, most sophisticated complement of skills that you have. And I think that, we've consistently done that. We've analysed where are the gaps, and we've tried to fill those gaps with amazing people. Okay. So I'd say that is one of my really, key points. Another thing is to make sure that everybody feels really valued on the team. Make sure everybody really knows what they're doing and feels really valued. And so one of my pet hates that comes from the world of medicine is I can't stand the use of the word junior. Okay. I find that really it doesn't help. People might have different skill sets, but they don't need to feel like they're lower or less than you. In medicine, even when you're qualified as a specialist, you get called a junior specialist, which is absurd. You've been studying for 15 years to be a specialist. I think you can just be called a specialist. But, and so that hierarchy in medicine I've never liked, and I have tried very hard in the teams that I've created, my team that I've created, to make sure that everybody feels like they've got a really important job on the team. Everyone's valued regardless of their skill set.
Well, that's great.
And I mean, just one to finish off with, I would say, is that I think it's really important not to expect that everything is smooth sailing. There's always a hiccup. There is always a barrier. There's always a challenge. And, I have never, ever seen any team get from A to B in a straight line. It just doesn't happen. And I think, though, that rather than be annoyed or be frustrated when that challenge or barrier comes up, you expect it and you perfect the sidestep. Just work it out. Just work out how are you going to get around that challenge. And that's why having all the people with great expertise at the table is very helpful, because together with a great team, I think you can negotiate any challenge. You can navigate, you can get around it, and you can move on and achieve exactly what you're after.
I like that, perfect the sidestep. That sounds great. Well, I've got one last question coming from our listeners. So father-in-law Jock is saying, curveball for you, Dr. King. What are your thoughts on the alcohol industry? So he says, being an Australian, I'm sure that you'll play it well. So this also came from my wife earlier saying, well, maybe you should try and get alcohol. I know you've got a specific mandate with being an oncologist, etc. But what are your thoughts on the alcohol industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to be honest, that question is really broader. So while we use tobacco as a case study when we go and meet with organisations, we in fact encourage organisations to build a sustainability framework that takes into account alcohol, cannabis, sugar, the pharmaceutical industry, human rights, ocean plastic, gender diversity, war, climate, palm oil, animal treatment, facial recognition technology, like all of these tricky issues that the finance sector has never really thought it needed to have a view on.
Sure.
Typically, why would a bank have a view on
palm oil?
Palm oil. But now, if a bank doesn't have a view on palm oil, it's not considered good enough anymore. The community expects more. And we know that there's overwhelming evidence that suggests that the community expects, especially CEOs and leaders of organisations, to have a position on all of these issues that have typically sat outside of their remit. So we work with organisations to work out what are the levers that you've got as a financial organisation, what can you do about those issues, and which tool do you use for which issue. And while tobacco is very black and white, it's actually the easiest issue, there's a whole lot of issues in there that require a lot of discussion and nuance. But there's no doubt that alcohol has many negative impacts on the world. And it is one of those controversial issues that needs a lot of consideration by financial organisations.
You had this 3-step approach you shared with me before about how you would decide whether this industry or product should be allowed. Maybe you could just remind me of whether, and then as it relates to alcohol, how that would fit for alcohol.
Yeah, so when applying an exclusion, it's a pretty rare thing for a financial organisation to actually exclude a whole sector. So you really have to be able to justify it. And we suggest that if you are looking at exclusions, ask 3 questions of the particular company or sector. Question 1, does a company make a product that can be used safely? And the answer for tobacco is no. The only safe number of cigarettes for a human being is 0. So it's very easy to answer that question. Question 2, does the company cause a problem so significant globally that it's subject to a UN treaty or a global convention? And the answer for tobacco is yes. There is only one global health treaty that exists, and it is the UN Tobacco Control Treaty, and 183 countries have signed and ratified this treaty, including South Africa, including Australia. And then the third question is, well, which is the correct tool to work with, to deal with that issue? And many organisations, many financial organisations have jumped onto this concept of engagement, and they use that as the tool to try to fix a problem. And so by that, I mean, they say, look, we're going to sit down with that company and say, you know what, we own a stack of your shares and we want to have a chat to you about what you're doing. We want to make you do it better or alter your behaviour a little bit somehow. But the problem with tobacco is engaging with tobacco companies is futile and makes absolutely no sense, because all you would be saying to them is, could you please cease business? Just stop your core business. So if we go back to alcohol, ask the same 3 questions. Question 1, does the company make a product that can be used safely? Now, technically, actually, alcohol is a carcinogen, and so many people don't realise that. So, for example, most women don't realise that, in fact, alcohol can cause breast cancer. So most people are unaware. But the difference there is that very low amounts of alcohol involve very low risk. So if you can drink, as a woman, I always say, if you can drink less than 5 drinks a week, your risk of serious illness or death from alcohol is less than 1%.
Okay.
So it's a very low risk. So it's different. It is different. Question 2, is there a UN treaty or a global convention on alcohol? No, there's not. And question 3 is, which tool could you use best to deal with that issue? And the other tool, so could you engage with alcohol companies and encourage them to not advertise during children's TV hour or during children's sport or during some kind of, underage activity? Mm-hmm. Could you work with them to, encourage better consumption, lower consumption or no binge drinking or, all sorts of different things. So some people will argue that that's a way to approach it. Some will use a best of sector investment approach. It's probably all getting a bit technical now, but, you line up all the companies in the sector and you would only look at investing in the ones that exhibit the best possible behaviour. And you can work your way through some other different things. And in some cases, so if there was a company that didn't respond to any of that exhibited terrible behaviour, that didn't, that wasn't amenable to any of the engagement initiatives that you had put forward at that point, maybe you could consider that. But I have to say, we've never worked with any big mainstream investors that have excluded alcohol. The only other thing that tends to come up with exclusions in terms of mainstream finance is controversial weapons like landmines and biological chemical weapons. And and for some companies, they will now no longer invest in the worst polluters in terms of the carbon footprint that they are subjecting the world to. And I think that's becoming, more and more of the conversation in sustainable finance. People are looking at green industries and saying, yep, let's go for it and pour money into them.
Sure.
They're saying no to what they're calling black industries, the really carbon intensive ones, and the brown industries are the ones that they are trying to engage with and get them more and more green day by day.
Okay. Well, I think it's a nice way you summarized it with, it did get quite technical, but you've put it quite clear with those 3 questions. Bronwyn, it's been a delight. It's been educational. It's been fun catching up with you once more. And if people want to find you, tobaccofreeportfolios.org, is that right? And I'll look your name up for a TED Talk.
Exactly. I'm very easy to find, and I'm on Twitter. And it'd be nice to know. Yeah, it's nice to continue the conversation and to hear from some of your listeners.
That'd be great. Thanks. Well, thank you for your time, and rest well. And till we meet up again sometime, keep well. Cheers, Bronwyn.
Sometime, somewhere. Thanks so much. Okay, bye.
Cheers, mate.
Bye.
Well, folks, thanks so much for joining the conversation and your great questions too. It's been wonderful. Until we meet again next time, stay safe.